We are a high performing college and I am a high performer, bringing in 100% funding for the college. But this data doesn't reflect the real working conditions and creative bookkeeping that is in fact in place. We bury the truth and have little or no regard for the learner. Some of us are achieving qualifications in less than half the minimum guided learning hours. The lack of quality is widespread and is orchestrated by management. That is until teaching observations start, when it all has to be fairy tales and bats and whistles. This isn't the career that I chose over a decade ago. Those aren't my words. They're the words of FE teachers working in different FE providers in different towns and cities in England. Those are a couple of voices out of 340 who responded to a survey that was sent out across the country in 2014 and 2015. Dodgy performance data is something that any teacher who works in FE knows all about, and yet it's never mentioned. The 157 group of colleges has talked about the problems at the heart of FE funding. I'm quoting, "Unlike the funding of schools and universities, the funding of colleges is closely linked to success rates. This has the perverse effect of encouraging colleges to offer courses that are easier to pass, or discouraging them from taking on students who might be seen as risky." In her report into vocational education and training of 2011, Professor Alison Wolfe talked about gaming. She stated, 14 to 19 education is funded and provided for young people's sakes, not for the sake of the institutions who provide it. This video is about a piece of research I undertook that aimed to address the issue, this elephant in the atrium, head on, and to find out the extent of practices around gathering and manipulating performance data in the FE sector in England. Why did I want to research these things? Why does it matter? Is this about naming and shaming individual teachers or colleges for cheating? No, it's not about any of those things. This is about the FE funding system that was set up in 1993 and has been operating roughly along the same lines for the last 20 years or so. The current government talks a lot about transparency, and performance data are key in this.
But the other thing is opening up the outcome data, measuring and then publishing what is actually being achieved, so that in health and education you have much more granular data available, which is not only incredibly important for the users of those services, but it's also really important for those who are managing it, because actually quite often you will not know how well your own organisation is performing compared with others, and without that comparative data it's really difficult to take remedial steps.
So what's wrong with that? I mean, who would want to argue against transparency? It's not as though any of us would prefer to be kept in the dark, to be deceived. It's not as though any of us prefer not to have information. But if we want data, we want accurate data. We don't want fabrication. The current policies of marketisation that form the backdrop for the governance of our state-funded education system are data-centric and data-dependent. Under this regime, every school and college and training provider across the land is a freestanding competitive institution that has to demonstrate it is raising standards and being accountable for public money. It's a system that encourages funding bodies, policymakers and central government to take a black box view of education. What is the black box view of education? Well, the black box view of FE is that it's a system, a technical delivery system. You put raw material in it, into each college in this case, and you get students with qualifications and skills coming out the other end. It's a formula, a closed system. But I'm using it here because FE funding encourages a focus on output rather than process. This means that every institution has to chart its performance and show figures for the progress of every student. For schools with a few hundred pupils, that's complicated. It requires a lot of effort. But for colleges, sometimes with as many as 35,000 students, spread over 5 or 6 campuses, that is a Herculean task. Imagine it. All across England, every educational institution working like a little factory to produce spreadsheet data. So how does the FE funding methodology work? I'm going to show you. 20 students are put in at this end. The money is on the table. Then after 8 months of teaching and learning, the students progress. Oh, but there's a problem. 20 went into the box, but only 16 came out. 4 students dropped out during the course. Now the college won't be paid for those 4. It will get reduced income because 20% of the cohort didn't complete. Now, from central government's perspective, you can see how attractive the black box view of education looks. By stating that it will only fund effective provision, and the definition of that shifts from year to year, they say that they are ensuring quality. There has been a growing awareness amongst teachers and researchers and others that there are serious problems with educational data as a result of these high-stake pressures. This is the context of the piece of research I want to talk about in this video. The survey was distributed first through an initial teacher education partnership network, then through the Learning and Skills Research Network in the West Midlands, and then through the IFL magazine Intuition. Finally, the same survey link was put out through the UCU membership email network. UCU is the University and College Union. 160 different institutions were represented in the responses from across all the regions of England. The survey focused on teachers' views on performance data and their role in producing these data. It also looked at the leadership and management cultures within their institutions relating to such data. Survey participants were asked to respond to a series of statements and check a box against a statement to indicate whether they strongly agreed, 1, through to strongly disagreed, 4. After each of the statements, there was an any other comments box. When I wrote the survey, I wanted to provide some space for respondents to give their views. The vast majority used the spaces to give accounts of the kind of data manipulation, Goldstein calls it optimization behaviour, that they had witnessed or were being asked to take part in. I'm only going to cover a small range of results from the statements to provide an overall impression of the data. Leaders and managers in my college are in touch with the data and the demands that teachers face and are aware how teachers struggle to reconcile the two. 67% disagreed or strongly disagreed with that statement. The next one. Data in my college are handled in a critical way. Management know the real picture and know and care about the relationship between the data and reality. 68% disagreed or strongly disagreed. Next one. I regard the performance data produced for funding purposes as not nuanced enough and as interfering with the quality of teaching and learning in some instances. 61% agreed or strongly agreed. And finally, in my college, it is widely understood that accountability involves teachers meeting students' needs and not just focusing on producing favourable data. 62% of respondents disagreed or strongly disagreed. Together, the survey responses present a picture in which performativity and the distortion of data in order to produce a favourable representation of providers' activities is endemic. The overwhelming majority of respondents to the survey identified the huge pressures facing them as teachers to produce these favourable performance data. This was seen by many to be a powerfully negative influence on their work, but not just on their work, but also on the quality of the education offered in their institutions. What about the written comments? Here's a taster. We've been told how much money we need to make if we are to keep our jobs. My job is to maximise the performance data independently of student needs. Putting students' needs first does interfere with performance data. It's almost impossible to put students' needs first without also being constantly reminded of targets. I am bullied into completing additional learning support documents to claim funding for men with vague learning needs. I think claims of this sort are fraudulent. The college is mad about data as an Ofsted inspection is coming. An increasing amount of paperwork is required to ensure that the college acquires and secures financial funds for each student. The student needs are lost and focuses on quantity rather than quality output. In theory, students' needs are the priority, but in reality data is the main consideration as students have become customers. There is a strong doublespeak. What the college says and tells us it has as its mission is at complete odds with what we as teachers are expected to do in the classroom. So that's the view. Why haven't we known about the extent of these problems before? What are the forces at work that are preventing us from speaking about this elephant in the atrium? We can talk about education in many ways. We can talk about it as a journey of enlightenment, a period of self-discipline and hard work leading to rewards for the self through the gaining of socially recognised qualifications. We can talk about it as a social process in which teachers interact with students in a joint exploration of knowledge. We can talk about it as a way of socialising young people so they belong in our society and help to move it forward. It can be all of these things. What it usually isn't is a linear process in which you stick the raw material in one end and get the modified and improved product out at the other end. I've never met anyone who thinks of education as being like that. And yet that has become the way that the funding and marketised systems of governance are encouraging teachers and managers to view it. If only education was as easy as counting beans. What conclusions can we draw? Well, we've got to stop pretending that these performance data are some kind of objective set of metrics. We've got to stop pretending that they're an accurate way of informing people about how good a college is, about how good teachers are, about how good courses at a particular college are. The biggest problem with a data-driven regime that focuses on completion is that it results in spoon feeding. This implies not just rote learning, but the infantilisation of the student. The student sits passively behind a desk and is fed content for the coming assessment. It's an educational experience that doesn't encourage independent thought or even development. It has a primary aim to fill the student with the knowledge needed to get them through the assessment, and the ulterior motive behind that is the harvesting of funding for the institution. Combined with the time consideration, the hours teachers are given to deliver courses are often being reduced, so teachers are forced to plan their sessions rigidly in order to ensure all the content is covered. One survey respondent likened this to a non-stop train. No attention is paid to students' learning at different rates. There's no time for the teacher to slow down, to make allowances for student need. The train just keeps on rolling. Spoon feeding results in a systematic narrowing of every student's educational experience, because an assessment is supposed to sample from the curriculum and gather information about learning through that sampled assessment. If a teacher starts to focus only on what is going to be assessed, that will distort the results of the assessment. That's according to Daniel Koretz. That will produce good performance data, but those data will provide an inaccurate picture because of the narrowing of the curriculum. Unfortunately, spoon feeding isn't the end of it. Another of the survey respondents talked about force feeding. The French call it gavage. It's an industrialised approach to producing foie gras. You may have eaten it without being aware how it's produced. It's not a pretty sight. Many people regard it as inhumane. It's certainly a stark metaphor for a student's experience on an FE course. An industrial process where the passive recipient is stuffed with knowledge. A goose with a funnel down its neck. Is that what we've reduced FE to? Even when a teacher is forced to adopt those kind of methods, she or he still cannot calculate for the life events of their students. They might have a student who gets pregnant and leaves. They might have a student whose accommodation falls through, whose parent dies, who decides to get work or to leave the country. But the figures for that year will be taken as an indication of their performance as a teacher. Absurd, isn't it? But that's the way performance data are used in FE. Some commentators have called it unintelligent accountability. But that is to understate the significance of its impact. The high stakes nature of these performance data and the way they are gathered is actually changing teaching and learning. It's changing the way teachers work, the decisions they make, and in some cases, rather than raising standards, it's causing standards to decline. Incidentally, did you know that the production of foie gras is banned in the UK? So we can throw that away. Well, if it's illegal to do it to geese, why on earth are we adopting that approach with the education of our children and young people? That's the key question that comes out of this piece of research.